Coming up, we take a look at the NBA draft class and that sweet French connection with three prospects throughout the first round, rising up the board potentially. What would it mean for Brooklyn to land one? We dive in coming up next.
You are Locked On Nets, your daily Brooklyn Nets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Yes, my friends, it is the Locked On Nets podcast right here on the Locked On Podcast Network. It's your team, the Brooklyn Nets, every single day. He's Doug Norrie. I'm Adam Marnbeck. We thank you, as always, for making us your first listen of the day. We are 100% free on all those great platforms. And as promised, we said we're going to start to get into the deeper portion of this draft class. And with three players in Essengue, Traore, and Penda, we are going to cover, depending on which board you follow, the spectrum of the entire first round. But this is, I think, what you and I were anticipating as we work our way towards the back end of May and into draft month, Doug, seeing names that are starting to inch up the board in a lot of scenarios, which makes it kind of this fluid scenario for where Brooklyn could be in different spots.
Yeah, we'll say it like, to the end of the month, at least. It's like, this is just going to be such a fluid draft. I think we're already seeing, like Jase Richardson didn't measure as well as some people thought. We might see him drop. We're going to see, maybe we see CMB climb a little bit here. Maybe Demon climbs a little bit. And Noa Essengue, like, I'm sure I'm saying this name wrong. I watched tons of videos on this guy, but then a lot of them are in French. And so I'm like, am I going to not say in the French name right? I'm going to say Essengue. And we're just going to hope it's close enough. And then you get a guy like him where... French. Again, like this guy's a good example of what are you valuing here? Are you willing to wait 3 to 4 years, 5 years for it to kind of like all come together and hope that it like completely hits? Cause then you just have, something like really, really crazy good on your hands, or do you want to take high floor now? Like there's so many guys in this draft that fit different molds. And he's just another example of like, you could easily see him. You could see him being a bust. You could also see him like 5 years being like, he went 14. What was everyone thinking? Right. Like, yeah. And this feels like it's just one of those drafts. And he's just another guy that when you look at some of the, the measurables, when you look at the way he's playing at a super young, he's so young. When you look at him as playing at a super young age, at a kind of, with other professional sort of like men in France and all this other stuff, there's just so much to like. So I can see that why there's a widespread on where he's being mocked now. I think we will see him climb as we get closer to the draft, as more and more people sort of talk themselves into, you just can't get a guy. Let me just make sure I have this right. Yeah. You're just not going to get like a 6'10" guy who can maybe play the 3, and you're like, okay, right. Like I can talk myself into that because there's just a lot of stuff you can do with a player like that if the other things hit.
And some have him, 6'9", 6'10", but also a sub 200 pounds. So this guy, I mean, he is the definition, right? And now we all know, right? Well, just look for the molds, right? Wemby came out rail thin. Don't worry about it. It all pans out in the end. But with a player like him, so there's a couple of things. I mean, obviously, everything about him is about upside and about the development, right? If you have a long runway, and most prospect outlines, it'll say you need to go to a club that isn't worried about short-term timeline, right? Well, Brooklyn Nets, check that box. You could say take 2 full years, and then we'll start to really evaluate where this player is. He only has 25 games under his belt over in Europe, but if you're thinking about different areas of his game, like expanding some of it, free throw shooting is up over 70%. He did also see incremental improvements when we talk about three-point shooting from 25 up to almost 30% and went from under 1 to nearly 2 3-point attempts per game. That's just the high-level stuff. But I want to ask you something when we talk about him, because you said that idea of someone looking back and go, this guy went 14th. So we'll use Tankathon's mod in terms of their big board right now. If you're there at the 8th overall pick and you're the Brooklyn Nets, and right now that would be Derek Queen, and then working back, Yakachionis, Fears, Richardson, who's going to fall out of this likely, Newell, who you and I both think is going to fall out of this as well. Maybe it is CMB that's rising. And then it's Essengue, however you want to phrase the name. Where are we in terms of as it relates to the Brooklyn Nets? And if that is the list of players that's on the board at 8, what's the conversation that Sean Marks and the Nets are having around short and long-term prospect value?
I think they have to go for long-term prospect value, and they're going to be in a spot here where they're going to probably have to choose. he does represent the kind of guy that with like massive upside. This is the kind of player the Nets should be trying to draft. They should be going for absolute top upside. And that's different. And I think he has it. Look, just real quick about him, then I'm going to say something about the Nets in general. But like, he's 6'9", 6'10". He's only 18. There's a chance he fills out. The body fills out. It looks like it could fill out some. I don't think it's going to be like a huge guy, but I don't think he's like stuck at like perpetual total skinniness. If you just like look at his thing, I'm not an expert in this. That's just like my blink test on that.
By the way, I've put on
think
weight
that
over
like
the years, so I think it's possible for anyone to achieve that.
Samesies. Like you can see it coming together defensively. Like he can already get to the rim pretty well. Like he's got sort of it's not just like tall, but no athleticism. It's there for him. The shot looks like it wasn't amazing, but it looks like it'll probably come around. You have a lot of time with him because, like you said, he's just barely 18 years old. And so if you're the Nets, you look at this kind of prospect and you're like, if I'm on a 5-year plan, this is the kind of guy you go for. Yeah. Now, it's a little weirder at 8 because you're going to have to probably reach on him a little bit. And there probably at that point will be another guy there that almost for sure will have more impact to start his NBA career. Right. And so you could be in a weird spot. And like, would Nets fans love it if they reached on Essengue and didn't draft like Jeremiah Fears because he fell to 8, right? Or something like that, or even Molly Watch, like if he falls to 8, so I think there's a lot of scenarios where I do think though is interesting. I'll tell you teams that like would never, well, they're not going to be in the spot. Like Sixers, no way. Rockets, no, right? Like he's just not going to be on their timeline. Even the Bulls, it's like not totally clear that he'd be on their timeline with them kind of just trying to be sort of mid good right now, right? And so I think there are a couple teams that it just like Spurs at 14, probably not. He's not on their timeline. Like there's just teams in here that I just don't think would actually reach in to go grab him. So I think there's a world where he's just off the board for a few of these teams. And then you can maybe start, as he fall to 19, probably not. So you're going to be caught in between. All this to say, I think he'd be a reach at 8. And then but maybe not. And then there's a bunch of teams that I can pretty much tell you right now are not going to draft him just because of where they are in their own timeline. And then you're kind of left in between. So I don't think the Nets do it, but it would represent the kind of pick that if you're Sean Marks and you're like, we're on a 5-year timeline, like, let's just ride it out. Let's just see what happens, because he has the ability and the size and stuff to be like kind of superstar level, but a lot of things need to go right in that time too.
And so off the top as well, when we talk about players like this coming into this draft class, he does pop off the screen, right? Like when you watch his tape, has that thing, right? Whatever that energy is, the fluidity to it, open floor, knows how to get into the right spaces. And as you mentioned, it's a lot of raw talent, but it's also like you don't have to squint too hard to see it. You mentioned as well too, just if we're rounding out this part of the conversation on him, going back through those teams, Portland, certainly the Wizards at 18, you can throw in the Hawks, maybe at 13, other teams around that, like OKC, and the Magic and the Timberwolves, like those are teams you don't think about. So, there probably is not only with a player like this, but players overall, especially when you have 4 first-round picks, you're doing the equation of where do other teams evaluate a raw athletic prospect that's going to need a couple of years to fill themselves out. There may only be 3 teams between the Nets making their 8th pick and making their 19th pick that would go after and draft this player. Then the other part becomes, is there teams that are going to move around the board? So to me, it's really fascinating. I don't know if it'd be interesting, like before we close out the end of the month, I think putting together like where we see the board in terms of players that we like, because I'll say right now, as good as somebody say like Trey Johnson is, and he's been falling relative to the board, him being there at 8, I don't think we'll look back 3 years from now and say Trey Johnson, the transcendent talent that was taken 7th, 8th, or 9th overall. Doesn't mean he's not going to be a really good player, but I don't think he falls into that category. And that's the math you're doing about not seeing a prospect for maybe 2 years or 3 years, and then hoping that it comes to fruition. Coming up here in a second, though, we also have to have a conversation about 2 other French players. One in Nolan Traore, who has been muddling around those mid-teen kind of areas. What do we think he's capable of being at the NBA level? And has Doug finally got that sleeper out of his eye? We'll do it all here in just one moment.
All right, before we get to that, say about our friends over at Car Gurus. Look, if you're shopping for a car, it should be exciting, not exhausting. Between the confusing prices and hidden fees, it can feel overwhelming. That's why I love Car Gurus. help you cut through the noise and show you the best deals with full confidence. Look, point of honesty here, I'm in the market for a new car, and I was literally before the show started over on Car Gurus, and I found I have an exact make and an exact model and exact color that I want. I was over there. I never do. I put in 4 requisitions right before the show. I said, send me more information, Car Gurus. I need it. You have exactly what I want. It's just going to be, we're just going to have everyone compete against each other. Now, I found exactly what I was looking for. I cut through all that noise. I'm going to find a deal I can trust. I know it makes it super easy to compare vehicles side by side with unbiased deal ratings. They got over 4 million listings. I found 4 of them. Best feature, price drop alerts. We're hoping for one of those for the Dougster. So you know exactly when the perfect car is available for your budget. No wonder similar web estimated traffic data shows Car Gurus the #1 most visited car shopping site. Buy or sell your car today. The Car Gurus at cargurus.com. Go to cargurus.com to make sure your big deal is the best deal. That's CARGURUS.com. Cargurus.com.
All right. As we continue today's Locked On Nets episode, talking about the draft and talking about a range of players. First time really that we're going to start to get back into these teens and even into the 20s with the next 2 players in Traore and Penda as well. When we think about a player like Nolan Traore, he's already been on the radar for a long time.
Yeah.
Like another French player was in the teens. I think the ideal was coming into this year, he was going to vault himself even higher and start to be talking about as like a lock for lottery, maybe push to the top 10. Didn't quite go that way. Like it was not a great season for him. But what are for you? Because I do want to get into a couple of numbers things here that do matter for another young player. When we talk about, you mentioned, Essengue being only just 18 years old. Same thing in Nolan Traore. This is only a 19-year-old player. Does come in 6'3", $175. So on the smaller side, are the measurables enough for you already to say, well, I'm not taking a risk at this player early in the draft, and I'm calling early 19 here for Brooklyn with their second pick?
Yeah, 19, I could probably see it. I mean, the Nets are going to need some point guard help here. Like, he can run pick and roll. He is pretty fast. We did do a podcast about, he was way higher in mocks last summer because we did a podcast or part of a podcast about him because we did all the top 10 last summer when we're like, Nets are tanking. Let's look ahead and see what we're looking for this year. And I know we did Nolan Traore during that time. So, or like he was at least around that group. And so he definitely did fall. I think at 19, based on the speed and being able to get into pick and roll, be able to get downhill a little bit, I think I'd probably be fine with it. Maybe you hope the shooting comes around. You're probably not locking in like superstar potential on a lot of these guys anyway. And I think that he probably could at least help facilitate some of the offense. I mean, look, we saw this year, the Nets, they had like 2 guys that could dribble, maybe. And that's like rounding up on certain nights. Yeah. They just had nobody who could dribble. They just had no guards. It was like D'Lo played, they had him. Trendon Watford played backup point guard. Tosan played backup point guard at times. I mean, they had nothing. So really anybody that came in the door now would represent better point guard options than the Nets were basically running out for all last year.
Yeah.
Traore, I sometimes do like when a guy was like higher, but then dropped because something like didn't go exactly as planned during the year. Right. But as far as I'm concerned,
in theory, on paper, he already proved something, and now he struggled a little bit to maintain it, right? Like as a young player.
Yeah, and also we saw a bunch of the guys like fly up because this is a great draft. So it's like not all him. I think some of this is it didn't go exactly as planned in France, and also some of these guys just really crushed their draft stock. Really inflated their draft stock over the course of the year. So I think there was like 2 competing factors happening here with him, where I don't think it's as bad as the drop would seem, and it probably isn't as high as he would have been last summer when he was in the top 10. But the speed plays at the NBA level now. He knows how to read screens, which is pretty important for the NBA. Like, you have to be able to read the initial screen really well and be able to manipulate it. I think he actually do that pretty well. And like we've said with this, a lot of guys, like the shooting needs to come around, but that's kind of the story for a lot of these guys. And so I think I'd be fine with this at this point in the draft, with the idea that I always like to have guys that have at least one pretty awesome thing, and speed to me is sometimes one of them, right? It's like, are you just super fast? Like that's good enough for me in a lot of ways at this point in the draft, not at 7 or 8, but at 19 or later. Yeah. As long as you have one thing that really plays, I think you're okay.
And it's funny too, because, it's like he is fast, but it's not breakaway speed fast or, blur on the court fast. We talked about this with other prospects, but it is when I get the corner on you, I'm getting to the
Yes.
basket, right? And likes to go right, but can finish with his left as well. I think he does a nice job getting into like defenders' bodies and then creating that little step back space for himself on some of those little jumpers around the rim too. The other thing that I'll mention when you look inside of his numbers, because as you say, and I think you're right, if 3 or 4 players have really jumped up their draft stock just by that alone, Traore goes from being a guy, maybe he's 15. Okay, well now he kind of close, right? Like just players having really good seasons for themselves coming up to the draft. But here's the other thing. He played 7 games the season prior and then 30 games this year. The minutes per game, 19 and a half to 22 and a half. So basically the same. Didn't see the assist numbers go up a lot, but the assist to turnover ratio got better year over year. It was 5.4, basically, 5.5 to 3. And then this past season, 5 to 2.5. So he's getting that in the right direction as well. But more importantly, if you had asked me this last year, I would have said, hey, shooting 60% of the line is a real concern on 4 attempts per game.
Yeah, that's things.
Now, he only had 3 this past season, but it jumped to 71. So, again, at just 19 years old, I can think how that can go and get better as it builds forward. Same thing with the three-point shooting. I could look back the first year and say 25% on 3 attempts per game for a point guard. Like, we have a problem here. And even though it's only 30% the next season, it's over 4 attempts per game. So I don't think his shot is pure. I don't think we're going to turn around here and go, oh my God, he's a 39% three-point shooter. No. But if you can get up to 34 and start to talk about 35, 36% from 3, along with everything else we're talking about his game, then I think you have something. And I don't know if he'll ever fully get there with the perimeter shooting like that, but there's enough in the offensive bag, enough of a table setter, creating opportunities for others. It's one of the rare instances, I will say, and you're right, at 19, this feels good, not when you're talking higher in the draft. That's why you and I think both with a guy like Jase Richardson on measurables alone thought this is going to need to move down the board a bit. 6'3", $175. It's one of the rare instances when those measurables are not deterring me from liking him as a potential fit for the Brooklyn Nets, especially when we're talking about that 19th pick.
Yeah, like I don't think he's a future NBA star, but I think he's like a future NBA player. And I think at like later on in the draft, which is where we're talking, like these starting to get into these later picks, I think you're kind of okay there, right? Like, is he? He's like that. I mean, he's like upside like Scoot, probably not. He's like probably too small, but like, I don't even know. I'm having trouble with his comps. He's just a little small. Overall though, I wouldn't be turned off to it. We're having just a different conversation when we're thinking later in the draft now. They are going to, I'm all for drafting best player available. I do think there's a part where like they just are going to have some ball handlers here too to be able to help facilitate some stuff. I don't think you should draft a guy just because you need someone to dribble. I think there is upside in his game. It's just like
it is an odd requisite for the Nets to draft, but like based on their history at the position, I think
he fell a little bit, but some of these guys like Kaman Kamal Maliwatch wasn't talked about in this group to start the year, and now he's in the top 10, right? So like some of these other guys just bumped him down. It's like they bumped him down more than he just bumped himself down, like all the way. Some of these guys just climbed up over him.
So let me ask you one more thing, actually, before we move off of him and talk about Penda, because the other thing, we were talking about guys that have been rising up this board, maybe something that ends up keeping him in that kind of that mid-teens range is also, when we talked about Jase Richardson, we also talked about Newell. Like, depending on which boards you go and look at, these guys are going to come down. So there's something happening here where at the end of it, Traore just ends up kind of right where he was. And guys have jumped over top of him, and guys have also fallen down. I think he's an interesting prospect. And to your point, at some, when you look at certain mocks and you don't see the Nets getting at least a high on ball backcourt player, maybe taking a swing on a couple of them, depending on size and other measurables, that's concerning to me. Because at some point, if you're taking all 4 of these picks, you need to be adding some talent and some depth to the backcourt specifically. But coming up here in a second, not a backcourt player. As we get our attention over on Noah Penda, he's another guy. Back into the first round, some boards have him moving up into the top 20 now. Not as young as the first 2 prospects we discussed, but is he a player that has the right mold to be something the Nets could look at as we work our way towards the back end of the first round? We'll do it here to close things out in just one moment.
All right, before we get to that, tell you our friends are over at Skims. You find out Skims is making underwear for men. You got to get intrigued. Heard so much about their quality from friends, maybe from some family out there. You're going to want to give it a try. It's going to live up to the hype. Look, if you've had issues with underwear, whether it's fit, comfort, maybe just finding the right style, Skims is going to change all that. Their men's line offers something for everyone. They got the boxer briefs, they got the classic briefs, all designed with the perfect balance, comfort and style. Maybe you want to go for the boxer brief, yeah, you're going to get hooked perfectly. They're going to fit perfectly for your active lifestyle. They're going to move with you and never lose their shape, stay in place all day, working out or just running errands. The boxer brief has you covered. Go to shop Skims Men's at skims.com/LockedOnNBA and Skims stores. Let them know we sent you. You place your order, select podcast in the survey, select our show in the drop-down menu that follows. Skims is the official underwear partner of the NBA, WNBA, and USA basketball. That's skims.com/LockedOnNBA.
All right. As we tie a pretty little bow on today's Locked On Nets episode, talking about the draft, talking about 3 players in a real wide range, and certainly the first time that we start to get ourselves into the late teens and into the 20s when we talk about these prospects. But one thing I will mention here, Doug, before we turn our attention and talk about Noah Penda, there's a fascinating thing. So I'm going to use 2 examples here. We always say all you can do is pick a board and go by it, especially when we're talking about, the top 10 and the lottery players that we discussed over the past couple of weeks. But over on the Ringer, you would have Penda at 18. Then you'd have to move down the board to get to Essengue, who's going to be 24th. And then Traore is all the way down at 33rd and outside of the first round looking in. Meanwhile, over on Tankathon, you're going to be 14th for Essengue. You're going to be talking about Traore at 16th right now. And then you're going to be looking at Penda at 28th. And I think if you're asking me where I put all these guys, I don't actually think that Traore and Penda are that far apart necessarily. Age, a big factor. If we think about for the Brooklyn Nets, he is over 20 years old already. First guy that we talked about that has been 20 or above here in this draft class. There are some things that I really like about his game. And I wonder if defensively early in his career, there's enough value that you can kind of project on the offensive game, rounding out enough to be a consistent contributor at the NBA level.
Yeah, just real quick about these rankings. The Essengue at 30 feels totally wild to me. But again, I'll go to Penda 1 second. It feels wild to me because it just seems so low for kind of like what you might be buying on the upside. Like it just seems really risk adverse, and I'm not really sure that I get on board with that. But it does speak to just wildly different evaluations of some of these guys, because like their board is very chalky top 10, and then it really starts to deviate. And it's like one of those things where like, it's like, if you go an inch off course in space and you give yourself, a light year, you're going to be really far.
Where the
and you just keep, you face it 1 inch to the right, and then you keep going straight and, see where you are in 10 years. It's not going to be, it's going to be a lifetime away from where you went to do. So it's like, it's almost like that happened starting in the teens, where it's just like things just started going crazy. With Penda, look, I mean, like crazy good versatility defensively. He's like sort of your prototypical 3-and-D wing if the three comes around. He could probably guard just about anybody now. I think like that all plays.
Yep.
I think you're just worried. I think probably with him, the reason he's sitting here, as opposed to like, let me think like a Carter Bryant maybe or something like that, where it's like, okay, I can kind of probably see him getting downhill at some point, and I can kind of tell myself a story where like the ball handling comes around a little. He's like a little bit of a playmaking wing, and now you really, really have something. I think it's like a much harder story to tell that with Penda, where I think the defense, you tell it you're good. The shooting, you're a little iffy on, and it's like not totally clear if he's ever able to like get by anybody or whatever. But I mean, the thing is, these guys with this size at this part of the draft, like, I don't know, you're probably like, hey, I'm just getting a 7-footer that like might be able to defend everybody. And if you can shoot 33% from 3, then we're good. But he's not going to turn into like a playmaking wing or anything. But again, if you look at this, there's going to be a certain group of people that are going to be like, hey, I'm just never going to get a 7-footer with this kind of athleticism. So that's going to be something that can go higher for me. And but if everyone else is like, well, he's never going to be able to do anything else, and you're like, well, that's just in the 30s. Like, and I think it's weird how you can tell the different stories about these guys.
Well, it's going to be an interesting part too here, because we've been looking over so many different prospects. We're talking about like 6'8" here on Penda. We're not talking about 7-footers. So we're talking about a guy that's going to be smaller coming into the league, obviously.
Oh, so I was looking at his wingspan. I was looking at his wingspan.
By the way,
his wingspan.
Guess what?
Yeah,
7-foot wingspan is more than enough to get excited about as well, by the way. Because I mean, it actually does matter. It's why defensively he has that versatility. But you're also talking about him coming in, being a 225, I think is what they have him weighing in at. By the way, I don't often think about, like, there's certain physical attributes jump off the page. Guys are broad across the shoulders. They're going to build up a little bit. His elevation on his perimeter shots, I don't know if you can get a sheet of paper underneath there. But as you pull up from that non-vert, This guy has calves. Like the calf muscles on this dude look like a fully sleeved Genoa salami fresh from the local deli. Like the guy is big and thick and NBA ready. And he's already 20 and a half. So you are talking about a guy that would be older, especially by the net standards, where any of these draft picks you're saying, hey, if you need to develop for a year or two, like we're talking about, where will we be? Well, then you'll be 23, 24 years old. And that's why even when we talked about a guy like Jalen Wilson, when he was drafted and where his game is, that's the risk, right? All of a sudden, you're maybe already played out of the window and the developmental structure the Nets want to go into. Here's one thing I'll say for him, though. You talk about the three-point shooting because he played almost 27 minutes a game over 29 games. So consistency there. Free throw shooting under 70%, but right there on the cusp of it. And you mentioned the 30% from beyond the arc. But if you go over and you look on a game log basis, over his last 8 games last season playing over in France, he averaged 38%. And that includes the final game of the year where he went 1 for 6. So he did improve in that area. And I think he had a total of, I want to say 14 games where he shot 33, 34% or above. Like, so there has been times when he's done it. And at a minimum, the nice thing is that he's continued to try to develop that area of his game. He took a lot of 3-point shots, over 3 per game. This is like, when we talk about, I know it's centers for the Nets. We talk about like a Day'Ron Sharp and saying like, well, when he gets out there, you just need to pull the trigger. We started to see him do it a little bit more, still not hitting it at all, and also hasn't been able to get on the court. Like a lot of what Noah Penda's game could be as like a consistent, defensively versatile player that can probably do enough. Offensively, shot, you mentioned getting by guys. I don't know if that's going to come around, specifically getting by defenders, but he does have really good spatial awareness. When he's off ball, he makes those backdoor cuts. Like he reads the play, reads the court, gets himself into open spaces pretty well too. So I think he's a heady player that's going to have to rely on probably like the IQ and defense early in his NBA career. And then if you can get that 3-point shot to anything respectable, yeah, now you've got that 3-and-D player you're talking about and a nice contributor. To close it out, I think, on that, do you look at like Traore and say Penda and say, if you're at 19, yeah, whatever you think fits better, or do you put that in the hierarchy like we've seen on a lot of boards mostly? Like Penda is maybe a rising name or a guy that's been listed in the 20s. Would you make that interchangeable at 19 if you're Brooklyn?
I think I'd rather take a guy like Penda than Traore. I think it's like my gut on that. And I don't know if I definitely over-index a little on like some of this other stuff, like the size and the wingspan and just hoping other things come around, and under-index on like basketball skills. And I think that's not always correct. And this is why I end up personally being like just lower on some of these point guards and higher on some of these project wings, right? And that's why I'm like Jeremiah Fears. I'm like, I don't know. Now, I could be wrong about this. Like, or even Traore, it's like, I don't know. It's like not that exciting. And then guys like Penda or Essengue, or we said this with Demon, Carter Bryant, we said it with. It's like, if I drafted, I might also just end up with a team of just like off-ball wings at their peak, and like
right.
We never have guys who can dribble. So I think I at times lean a little too heavy on this other stuff and don't ever fill out a complete basketball team. And I undervalue. I'm very aware that I undervalue guards, and I think it's like not always correct. And so I'm just pointing out like where, and I'm saying that I'd probably take Penda over Traore, but I'm also admitting why, because I think sometimes I kind of screw this up.
Well, and so the other notable thing about I probably tend to agree with you on that as well. Like if you've been watching the show over the years and around this draft, you can see like Doug and I tend to lean kind of in similar directions. But the other big factor here, and we'll talk about some of these guys. Listen, there's only another quick glance here. There's only 2, maybe 3 more point guards in the first round for the Brooklyn Nets if you don't take one at 19. So if they don't shoot their shot on a Traore or on another point guard of some kind, then you may be having a different conversation as you work your way through the draft. So that's what makes 8 so interesting and what they do there, and then how maybe it dictates if you're trying to build out your roster with 4 young rookies that are going to develop and grow together. Positional value is certainly going to be something to watch for here, but we'll talk about some of those guys coming up, including Walter Clayton Jr., he's been mocked to the Nets a couple of times here, even though he is old, and I wouldn't say that a 22-plus-year-old is something the Nets are going to be into, but there's a handful of guys that we can discuss and ask the question, are they better than, or do they project better than someone like Traore, who's been a little bit higher on the board so far?
Yeah. It's just funny. And we can already see it like just sort of like rounding in the shape about how we feel about guys. Because in thinking about this, I was like, well, I'm probably higher on Demon and Jakachionis than I am on Jeremiah Fears, right? And
Yeah.
that's one where I could look really bad because Fears could just come in and absolutely light it up, and I was maybe just a little too locked in on the size or lack thereof, and that could just be wrong, right?
What?
And so, yeah.
And we'll talk about this next time, but like this, the cliffhanger is guys can be really good at the NBA level. It doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be really good for building your franchise and winning basketball games and being, playoff caliber teams, right? There's a lot of electric players in the league. They don't always end up winning. They need the right combination of everything together. And I think we try to approach the draft in that vein. How are these guys going to develop and grow as the team for Brooklyn, not just as an individual talent? We've had guys like that. We have guys like that in Cam Thomas. It hasn't led to wins season over season.
Well, good news is whoever they draft, most of these guys will be better than what the team already has now. So all of it will be improvements. We are going to be back later. We're going to go over some more of the guys that we have. We haven't talked about some of these other guys. Liam McNeely's a guy we haven't talked about. We will talk a little Jase Richardson. We'll talk some of these other guys. We still got plenty of meat on the draft bone, as they say. In the meantime, yeah, make sure meat reference. Make sure you subscribe wherever you listen. Locked On Nets over on YouTube, over on Spotify, over on iTunes, all free. Easy for you. Number one way to help the show. Subscribe wherever you listen.
This is going to be a meaty one here. Listen, if you don't talk a big game, you never get anywhere. If you don't think big, if you don't get big, some people call it egotistical. Some people call it high hopes. Some people call it confidence. It's all in how you want to dissect it. And that, my friends, is legendary. Robert Matthew Van Winkle.
Oh, one of the is that Vanilla Ice? Is that Robin? What is that? Who that is?
That's Ice.
Oh, baby,
to you.
I got
Ice
that one.
baby.
I know. Yeah,
that's Mr. That's Mr. Ding 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 did a ding ding. That's the difference there between those two.
That's the difference. That's the difference. If you can't hear the difference, you don't know music. All right, we'll be back again tomorrow talking more Brooklyn Nets. Oh, one of the all-time great poets back again tomorrow talking more Brooklyn Nets basketball.
Just under the wire, meaty part.
Yeah, no kidding.
Basketball.